which means that any replica pistol or something like that needs orange tape around the nozzle to show that it is a replica and not a real gun. And another story, later incident with London Expo, a bunch of cosplayers decided that with all of like their Hetalia cosplayers that they would go into London City Airport because there's food in airports, right? The police just kind of, in the airport, just kind of flattened them on entry. It's one of those things where it wasn't really that funny, but it sort of is. So there we go. Think about what you'll be doing, think about if it looks like you're concealing weapons and things like that. Right, let's talk about sizing things up. Sorry, you had a question.
No, I just wanted to comment on that. I have a friend who has this steampunk cosplay, which is a huge backpack and this giant gun.
Yeah.
And he was traveling through, Göteborg, the main airport.
Mm.
And he commented that after that time, he always made sure to keep his, gun pointing downwards because suddenly there were guards everywhere just hailing him.
The other one is keep a picture of, if you are traveling, keep a picture of what the item is on you, like a photo or something like that. One of the Euro cosplay entries was shipping. It was at the airport. Sorry, I've got a friend who runs Euro cosplay. Was dropping them off. Who was telling us this story. At the airport, he had to go into oversized baggage because he basically had like a massive wing thing with like wires and metal everywhere inside this box. And they put it through the scanner and the oversized luggage, and they watched as the women took behind the scanner, friendly, chatty, things like that. They watched it go through, and then they all looked very concerned. The only reason they let it on the plane was because Joe could bring up a picture of what the costume was on his phone because it had been uploaded to the internet to say, actually, it's this inside there. So it's a good idea to like keep it, let people know what's in something. Right, sizing things up. To figure out the length of the sword, for example, compare the reference to yourself. If the character is this high and the sword comes to, if they're holding like that and it comes to their knee, make it about that size. Figure out roughly on you how big something would be. I see a lot of people doing it like Sephiroth costumes. Personally, I think it looks better if you scale the sword to yourself because 7 foot, first of all, no one's going to be able to sheath that. Oversized anime swords. I once did a commission for a guy who had a Dante coat from Devil May Cry, and he does that thing where he just puts a sword away, and it's like this fucking big. So what he would do is like, sword out for photos and that, and he would put it back, and then he had a friend come up behind him, hold the sword, and then feed it down through the back of it. So, think a little bit about practicality, because while accuracy is good, sometimes just being able to move about in a costume and have fun with a prop or something like that is much better than having it completely to the T. An interesting little fact, a katana blade, if you're wondering about what size to make it for yourself, it's a length from, if you hold your hand out like that, if you are holding the hilt of the sword, the tip of the blade will come to your nipple. And the total length of the katana, 3/4 of it will be the blade, and 1/4 of it will be the actual hilt. So try and get the proportions right for yourself. It needs to be length that you can put it in a sheath. No point. Actually, I've never made a sheath. Of all things, I've never made a sheath for a sword. That'll be interesting one day.
Do it.
Right, how to scale things up. There's a little bit of math for you, but I've got a picture which helps. What I tend to do now is in Photoshop, I bring up a picture of, say, a sword. I'm a bit like, well, the sword, I want it to be a meter. I'll use metric stuff for you. I want it to be a meter high or a meter long. What I'll do is I'll bring it up in Photoshop, make sure that the sword is sort of like perfectly down the picture, crop it so it's 10 centimeters and then print it off. So a 10 centimeter sword is on a sheet of paper. And then it's an exact 1/10 scale of the thing I want to make, so I can just measure it along and be like, oh, that length there is 4 centimeters, so on my sheet of foam or sheet of paper where I'm drawing it up, it needs to be 40 centimeters. So it's a way of copying it and getting the exact proportions right. The other thing you can do is, do you ever have this sort of like for doing watercolour pictures or murals or anything like this? You draw a grid over the item, and then you draw a bigger grid on the wall or something like that, and then you take each square and then draw the bit in place. I'll show you what that looks like. There we go. So we've got the little picture. Each of the squares are 2 centimeters in that picture. That one's actually, I just sort of doubled it up. Each of the squares are 4 centimeters in this picture. The math is if on the picture there, the sword is 20 centimeters long, and you want it to be 40 centimeters long. Oh, that's like the worst scaling anyway. Anyway, it takes a little bit of math, you'll get it in the end, but sometimes you just sort of try and sketch it up and see if the proportions are right. But yeah, that's one way to get an exact copy of a sword or a prop or anything like that, and it makes it much easier, because sometimes guessing is the worst thing you can do, and doing things by eye, the eyes lie to us all the time. One thing I did recently was I made an ivy whip sword for a commission, and it was a bit like, how wide will the hilt be and how long will this be? And she just printed it off like a full-scale copy and taped it together, just so I had something completely accurate and the right size to work on and sort of hold it over and to compare. Right, this also works with really big props. For example, that was 1 centimeter squares scaled up to 8 centimeter squares. Right, swords. Some materials you can make swords from. Wood, MDF, that's kind of like mashed up wood that's glued together. You probably have it here, but it's called something different. Yeah? What's it called, guys? Someone shout it out.
Plywood.
Plywood. Sort of. It's got smooth sides.
Nej, kanske. Kryssfinerar. Sponplater.
Yeah, can someone say it loudly so everyone knows?
Sponplater.
Kryssfiner. Krus. Okay. So we now know it, and you've heard it butchered by me. So, Alright, another stuff, mount board. You tend to use this in sort of art all the time. It's just basically layers and layers of paper all glued together to make, not corrugated cardboard, you know, the stuff with the waves in it, like normal cardboard boxes are made out of, but much stronger cardboard. The stuff is, you can have craft foam, so soft squishy foam, as long as there's some form of core inside it, which keeps it sturdy. And the other stuff is foam board, that's the sign making stuff I was talking about earlier. Swords from wood, cut to shape with a jigsaw. The one disadvantage I'd say with working with any kind of wood is that if you don't have the tools to work with wood and things like that, for example, I just kind of borrow a jigsaw from my parents if I need to do anything. Some people don't have parents who have jigsaws or don't live near their parents. If you're really hardcore, you can do it by hand. I wouldn't. I have like soft baby hands, you know, from all of the layers of skin I've lost, from all the horrible stuff that I used to make costumes and stuff. And then sand it down a lot. I can't emphasize how much you have to sand the shit out of wood. Because the main thing is, before you paint wooden prop, you need to get it as perfect as possible, because paint on wood shows every little flaw in it. So get it right and get it prepped before you go. Then I'd say seal with PVA, the school glue, or car lacquer. You can buy it from just sort of car shops. Just something you spray on which makes it smooth. Then I find spray paint works best. Most types of spray paint work. Obviously some of it's a bit of experimentation, see what works for you. And then seal with clear spray, so clear acrylic spray. The most important thing is actually sealing it at the ends, because then you won't get, sometimes if you paint a prop or plastic, it will be quite sticky to the touch. Sealing it with a light coating of clear spray adds a little bit of texture and will mean that it doesn't feel as sticky and weird, and it seals the paint in as well. Alright, sword from layers. Okay. This is for mount board, craft foam, foam board and stuff like that. Draw the sword out on the first layer, cut that out with your knife or scissors, and then glue that down to your plain sheet, and then cut around it again. So basically you're making a sandwich over and over again, but using the first one as a template to cut around. Repeat until it's to the thickness that you want. If you're using craft foam, build up the thickness and then have sort of a core, for example, for a little dagger or something like that. A couple layers of foam, and then something like wire down the middle for a core, and then glue the next layer on. If you use foam board, you tend to need to seal the edges, or the foam will show through. You know the sort of putty that you use to fill cracks on walls? What you want is one that says it's flexible, so it means that, you know, even if something's really rigid, it's going to flex a little bit, even metal flexes. So it's important to get a slightly flexible one, otherwise it will just crack and flake off. Here's an example of, these are quite big swords made from foam, but that gives you an idea. So the main shape was cut out in the scaled up drawing, and then it was glued down onto another sheet. This is me gluing the core inside of another one. You can see the tub of glue in the corner. It's taken from that angle. But you see it's just layers and layers of foam and then using a craft knife to carve the shapes. Right, finishing off, seal with PVA or gesso. The main thing I was going to say about foam is the biggest mistake people make with making props out of foam is that they don't seal it. If you spray paint over foam, it will look like foam spray painted. You need to paint it with either PVA gesso, which is kind of like an artist white stuff. I don't really know the equivalent. It was used by the art a lot in Art Nouveau in the 1950s. Sorry, it's a really obscure thing. However, you can buy it in art shops, and it may be called gesso because I think it's a French word. You need to seal it off. Almost 8 layers of PVA, so give yourself plenty of time to do that. Then paint it black with acrylic. I tend to paint all of my swords and weapons black, just because when you paint it onto black, it gives a more weathered effect than if you painted it white. If you've got any white bits coming through, you can kind of see that. However, on metal, seeing like little bits of black down the nooks and crannies tend to just make it look a little bit older, a little bit more like it's been used by the character. Alright, big swords. They're trickier because you have to make them light enough for you to lift, and you have to make them strong enough to hold their shape when you do lift them. You'll need an insert down the middle to support the sword, and then you build around that. The other good idea you can use is to weight the hilt to make it easier to lift. It makes the actual entire prop a little bit heavier to have. My Siegfried sword altogether weighed about 2 kilograms, which isn't much until you realise it is a bag of sugar like that. If you're holding it aloft, I went to one masquerade once where they would make you walk from room to room and basically you had to pose the entire time. By the time I got to the end of this, it was about 5 minutes worth of practically doing all that with a bag of sugar. It hurt so bad. I mean, if you ever want to do something, to test your endurance, just do that and see how long you can do it. You'll be amazed how heavy your arms are. But adding weight to the hilt, it meant that when I lifted it up, it was just like a lever, counterbalance. The way to add weights to hilts really easily is just by wrapping wire around them, like copper wire or something like that you can buy normally from electronic stores. Copper's quite heavy, and you just wrap it around the sort of hilt of it. LARP weapons, if they're weighted, they either tend to be weighted with a heavy metal rod which is slipped over the end of the core, or just wire coiled around it. Let's talk about some things you can make the support in the middle from. Wooden dowel, quite good, but if you knock it over one knee, it's possible it may snap, which can injure people. So if you whack your friend around the face, or my main advice is if you are, prop fighting, which you shouldn't do because you spent really long on this prop anyway, fighting with it's going to make it break. Never do a stabbing motion because you never know what may pop out the end. I don't know what LARP rules are like over in Norway, but in the UK they do have a no stabbing rule, just because all of them are fiberglass cord with latex and foam outside. So the easiest way to hurt someone is actually if your sword breaks and the core goes through and can actually stab them.